King Charles had survived public scrutiny, family betrayals, constitutional pressure, and the crushing responsibility of succeeding Queen Elizabeth. But nothing prepared him for the words delivered by his own son behind a locked palace door. Prince William did not raise his voice. He did not threaten scandal. He simply placed a document before his father, issued an ultimatum that could end the king's authority, and watched Charles collapse before he could answer. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The closed door changed everything. William entered the Buckingham Palace room carrying a sealed folder, while his father sat behind a desk crowded with state papers. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence, had witnessed crises. Yet this meeting excluded secretaries, advisors, and household officials. The prince placed the folder down and told Charles that he had 48 hours to transfer day-to-day control of the monarchy to the Prince of Wales. That title belongs to the heir expected to become the next sovereign. If the king refused, his son would withdraw from frontline duties and expose decisions that had endangered the crown's future. William felt anger tightening his words, but guilt and dread sat beneath them. He insisted he was not stealing the throne. He was trying to stop George, Charlotte, and Louis from inheriting an institution weakened by secrecy and family wounds no one dared confront. Charles gripped the desk and asked whether his son understood the cruelty of demanding surrender from his father. The monarch accused him of seeing a failed sovereign instead of the man who had spent a lifetime preparing to serve. Charles pushed back his chair and tried to rise. His hand struck a fountain pen, sending it to the floor as his face drained of color. His breathing tightened. Before he could finish his answer, the king collapsed beside the chair. William abandoned the ultimatum, dropped to his father's side, and shouted for medical help, his fury replaced by terror. Aides rushed in with physicians, but a courtier froze over the folder. Its pages contained dates, delegated powers, and a prepared announcement. This was no sudden threat. William had arrived expecting a shift in royal control. Then, while doctors worked around Charles, the future king noticed a handwritten line suggesting his father had considered transferring responsibility and had hidden that decision from him. As the king was carried from the room, and William stood frozen beside the abandoned document, one unbearable question emerged. Had the ultimatum destroyed Charles, or merely forced into the open a decision he had already been too frightened to make? To the outside world, they were the king and his heir, two men bound by ceremony, duty, and the future of Britain's most famous institution. In private, they were a father and son who had spent years speaking through advisors, schedules, and carefully controlled gestures. William's ultimatum did not begin with political ambition. It began with accumulated disappointment, unspoken grief, and the fear that love alone could no longer protect either man from the crown. Charles had waited almost his entire life to become sovereign, and that long preparation had shaped every part of him. The crown was not simply an office, it was proof that the criticism, delay, and years spent beneath Queen Elizabeth's enormous legacy had finally led somewhere. To surrender control now, even partially, felt like admitting that the role he had prepared for was already slipping away. William carried a different burden. He saw Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis not only as his family, but as the next generation who would inherit every weakness left unresolved. The Prince of Wales, the formal title given to the direct heir, feared that silence today would become damage his children would be forced to repair tomorrow. William still remembered the private conversation after his grandmother's death. Charles had asked for patience as he adjusted to the throne. His son had asked for honesty in return. Both believed an agreement had been made, yet months passed, and the distance between them widened. The king delayed difficult conversations. The future monarch began interpreting every delay as another broken promise. Neither man admitted how deeply the other's silence hurt. Catherine watched that hurt harden before the confrontation. She heard William rehearse his opening words, "Stop, then begin again." Her voice remained calm when she asked whether he was prepared to lose his father in order to protect the monarchy. He looked at her and answered that he feared he was already losing him. She understood then that the ultimatum was not driven by ambition. It came from desperation. Camilla had sensed the danger too. She noticed Charles canceling private meetings with his son and refusing to explain why. During one dinner, she watched him fold a note from William and slide it beneath his plate without reading it aloud. When she asked what it contained, the monarch changed the subject, but his silence told her the message had struck a nerve. The sealed proposal never demanded immediate abdication. It called for a regency-style transfer, a temporary arrangement, allowing another senior royal to handle major duties, while the sovereign keeps the throne. William meant to preserve his father's title and dignity, while taking operational pressure away. Yet Catherine later found one meeting missing from the official diary: the formal record of royal appointments. That erased encounter had changed everything. The collapse may have happened beside a palace desk, but the fracture began earlier. During one erased meeting when a promise was broken, a warning was dismissed, and William decided that silence had become more dangerous than confrontation. Every royal crisis has a point of no return, a moment that appears controlled in public but becomes poisonous in private. For Charles and William, that moment came during a closed planning session after a major Commonwealth ceremony. One empty chair, one altered speech, and one decision made without the heir's knowledge convinced William that the monarchy was being guided around him. From that evening onward, the argument was no longer about protocol, it was about trust. William had already pushed for a smaller and more transparent working monarchy, one that supported fewer causes but served them with greater focus. He wanted clearer spending, sharper responsibility, and firm boundaries between public duty and private family conflict. Charles saw danger in moving too quickly. The king believed continuity required patience, consultation, and space for reconciliation, because sudden reform could make a young reign look unstable before it had properly begun. Neither man doubted the other's devotion. They doubted each other's judgment. The decisive wound opened after a Commonwealth reception at St. James's Palace, a royal residence used for official gatherings and ceremonial business. William entered the scheduled strategy meeting expecting the joint discussion his father had promised. Instead, he discovered that a 5-year royal program had already been approved. Speeches had been altered. Duties had been assigned. The future king's place at the table had even been removed because every major decision was considered finished. William stared at the missing chair before asking why he had been excluded. Charles did not apologize. He told his son that an heir advises, but a sovereign decides. The words landed harder than anger, because they reduced the prince to a ceremonial presence inside the institution he would one day inherit. He left without opening the briefing folder prepared for him, while his father remained seated and watched the door close. Catherine recognized the damage when William returned home. He removed his insignia, the badge marking his royal position, and placed it down with unusual care. He told her he had been treated like a substitute brought forward for ceremonies, not a future monarch expected to carry the crown next. She watched his anger collapse into humiliation, and she understood that this was no longer a disagreement about schedules. William later uncovered something worse. A confidential amendment allowed major household decisions to proceed without consulting the Prince of Wales's office, meaning the team supporting the heir could be deliberately bypassed. He wrote Charles a private handwritten letter demanding that the clause be withdrawn. The king read it alone, folded it slowly, and locked it inside a red dispatch box, a secure case used to hold official royal papers, without sending any reply. That unanswered letter eventually became the first page of William's ultimatum. By refusing to answer his son's final private appeal, Charles did more than postpone an argument. He ensured that the next conversation would contain no appeal at all, only terms, consequences, and a door that neither man could reopen once it closed. William entered the room determined not to shout, because shouting would allow his father to dismiss the confrontation as anger. Instead, he spoke with the calm precision of a man who had already exhausted every gentler option. Charles listened without interrupting, but his stillness concealed a rising sense of betrayal. When the sealed folder finally crossed the desk, the space between father and son became more dangerous than any public scandal the palace had ever contained. William opened the document and laid out the terms one by one. He would take authority over royal scheduling, household appointments, financial reform, crisis management, and long-term planning. The transfer would not remove Charles from the throne. It would shift daily control to the heir while preserving the monarch's constitutional position. That position meant the legal role of the sovereign as head of state, even when practical duties were shared. The prince insisted the change would protect the crown from further strain, but his father heard something colder: a timetable for replacing him without using the word abdication. Charles finally broke his silence. He asked whether ministers had been consulted or palace lawyers had prepared the language. William said no. He had spoken to no government official because this was still a family decision, and once it became constitutional, private trust would be gone forever. The king accused him of disloyalty, saying loyalty meant standing beside the sovereign during difficulty, not calculating the moment to take control. His son answered without looking away. Loyalty without honesty became obedience, and obedience could not save a failing system. Charles felt the accusation cut deeper when the past entered the room. He asked whether William was judging him through the pain left by Diana. The future king did not deny it. He said secrecy, institutional defensiveness, and controlled silence had already damaged their family once. He would not allow those same habits to reach George, Charlotte, and Louis. His father heard the warning, but he also heard judgment. William then delivered the consequence. If the proposal was rejected, he would step back from investitures, formal ceremonies where honors are presented, along with overseas tours and major state support. Catherine would reduce her public role beside him. Without them carrying the heaviest duties, the monarchy's weakness would become visible within days. Charles stared at the folder before admitting, almost in a whisper, that he had been waking before dawn to reread official files. He no longer trusted others to make decisions in his name. For one brief moment, William saw exhaustion instead of resistance. Charles pushed the document away, but his fingers trembled. He rose and said his son had mistaken exhaustion for surrender. Then his breath failed, his balance vanished, and he collapsed. William dropped beside him and called for help. Camilla rushed in moments later, finding her stepson kneeling beside the king while the transfer document remained open. Camilla did not need an explanation. The signatures waiting at the bottom of the page told her everything, and when she looked at William, grief rapidly hardened into the suspicion that the collapse had handed him exactly the power he had demanded. The moment Charles was removed from the room, the palace machinery began moving without him. Telephones rang behind closed doors. Diaries were frozen. Statements were drafted and destroyed. Yet the greatest struggle was not medical or constitutional, it was personal. William had demanded authority while his father was conscious. Now, with the king unable to answer, every action the prince took could look either like responsible leadership or the opening move of a palace takeover. Senior officials gathered to decide who could approve engagements, speak with the government, and control what the public would be told. No permanent incapacity had been declared, meaning Charles still held full authority in law, even though he could not direct the household in practice. William understood the danger immediately. He refused to sit in his father's chair and rejected a statement prepared in the king's name. The prince insisted that existing procedures remain in place until the monarch personally accepted or rejected the transfer. One careless signature could make duty look like seizure. Camilla found William outside the private rooms and did not soften her anger. She asked whether Charles would still be standing if his son had waited one more day. The accusation struck him, but he refused to retreat. He told her that another delay would have continued the pressure already destroying his father. The queen consort heard concern in his voice, yet she also remembered the open document beside the fallen king. To her, compassion and ambition had become almost impossible to separate. Catherine later found William alone, holding the fountain pen that had struck the floor during the collapse. He told her he could still hear the sound. She took it from him and said guilt could not decide what happened next. because the monarchy still needed judgment, and his father still needed protection. The future king listened, but the shock remained in his hands. Courtiers soon divided into opposing camps. Some believed William had to assume operational control immediately to prevent cancelled duties and public confusion. Others warned that such a move would confirm Camilla's darkest suspicion, that the ultimatum had been designed to exploit Charles at his weakest. A senior aide then returned, carrying a sealed memorandum, a formal written instruction intended to guide officials during a crisis. Charles had signed it weeks earlier. The document stated that if he became temporarily unable to manage daily affairs, William should receive full access to royal operations and act with Camilla's counsel. The instruction changed everything, but one obstacle remained. Its signature required confirmation from the queen consort. Camilla studied the handwriting and recognized it immediately. Still, when every face turned toward her, she hesitated. With one word, Camilla could legitimize William's authority or trap the palace in paralysis. Yet her decision would depend on whether she saw him as the son trying to save Charles, or the heir who had finally chosen the crown over his father. By morning, the palace looked unchanged, but almost nothing inside it remained secure. Charles was resting under medical supervision. William had cancelled every engagement. Camilla had refused to leave the king's side. Beyond the gates, the public knew only that an official appearance had been postponed. Inside, one unsigned document had divided the household, and each person now faced a new reality. Whatever decision followed, the old balance of power was already gone. William's office received temporary access to royal schedules, private communications, financial briefings, and security reports. Every instruction carried the word provisional, meaning it would remain temporary until Charles recovered and confirmed what should happen next. The prince refused to treat that access as victory. He knew the monarchy depended on a clear chain of command, because conflicting orders could alarm the government and expose weakness to the public. He also knew that one aggressive decision would make his concern for his father look like ambition. Palace officials released a restrained statement saying the king was resting after a brief medical episode. They concealed the confrontation, the collapse, and the ultimatum. Yet unusual vehicle movements around the residence triggered immediate speculation. Charles had built his reign around continuity. Now, even a postponed appearance risked suggesting that the sovereign could no longer carry the pressure placed upon him. Camilla sat beside her sleeping husband and removed her shoes without taking her eyes from him. She held his hand and quietly said that William had begun reviewing the household. Her anger remained, but fear overtook it when the monarch did not stir at the sound of his son's name. She repeated it more gently. Still nothing. For the first time, the queen consort wondered whether the family struggle had pushed him beyond a point that power could repair. William faced a different pain when Prince George asked why his grandfather's engagement had been cancelled. The future king hesitated before explaining that leadership sometimes meant telling someone you loved what they did not want to hear. George accepted the answer, but his father was shaken by how easily the crisis had reached another generation. The operational review soon uncovered a darker secret. Charles had prepared to dismiss two experienced advisors who repeatedly warned that his workload was expanding, while internal command grew confused. Attached correspondence showed that one of them had secretly contacted William's office and described the king as overwhelmed. The prince realized his ultimatum had been shaped by information his father regarded as betrayal. Charles finally opened his eyes and looked directly at Camilla. He asked whether William had taken control. She answered that it was only temporary. The monarch remained silent, then demanded that his son be brought to him alone, without physicians, courtiers, or legal papers. For the first time since the collapse, the decision would leave the hands of advisors and return to the two men who had caused the crisis. But this time, there would be no desk between them, and no institution to absorb the pain. Charles had spent his life learning how a monarch should speak, but when William entered the private room, the king asked him to close the door and forget the monarchy existed. No secretaries recorded their words. No constitutional experts waited outside with instructions. There was only a weakened father, an exhausted son, and the truth they had avoided for years. Each believed duty had required him to hide his fear from the other. William found his father without a jacket, briefing papers, royal insignia, or the red box used to carry confidential state documents. Nothing in the room protected either man behind ceremony. The prince remained standing until Charles pointed toward a chair beside the bed, rather than one across from him. That small gesture changed the distance between them. This was no longer a sovereign summoning his heir. It was a father asking his son to stay close enough to hear the truth. Charles did not begin with the ultimatum's legal language. He asked whether William believed he had failed completely. The question stopped the future king, because it stripped away every argument about authority, planning, and duty. He answered that his father was not a failure. He feared the king was repeating an old family pattern, carrying impossible pressure until health, judgment, and love were damaged beyond repair. The prince said he had watched silence consume too much of their family already, and he could not allow endurance to become another name for destruction. Charles lowered his eyes and admitted what surrendering responsibility meant to him. He had waited a lifetime to serve, endured years of doubt, and finally inherited the crown beneath the shadow of Queen Elizabeth. Sharing power now felt like confessing that he could not carry the role he had spent decades preparing to hold. The monarch feared history would remember him only as a brief interval between two stronger reigns, his mother's and his son's. William reached inside his coat and removed the ultimatum. For one tense second, Charles expected the document to be placed before him again. Instead, his son tore away the page containing the 48-hour deadline. The prince said he would abandon coercion, but not the need for change. Charles then explained the handwritten line found on his desk. It referred to a phased transfer, a gradual handover of selected duties, while the sovereign keeps his constitutional authority, planned for later that year. He had hidden it because he wanted the decision to appear deliberate, not forced by weakness. The king asked William to rewrite the proposal with him. Daily strategic control would move in defined stages, while Charles retained his role as sovereign. Before his son left, he made one final request: bring Camilla, because no settlement could survive without her acceptance. The battle between sovereign and heir had ended, but the family settlement remained incomplete, and the hardest acceptance would have to come from the woman who believed William's ultimatum had nearly taken Charles from her forever. The palace had contained abdications, divorces, illnesses, and family fractures, but it could not contain this secret. By sunrise, the confrontation had escaped through a single message sent from inside the royal household. Within minutes, broadcasters interrupted scheduled programs, newspaper editors tore apart completed front pages, and crowds gathered beneath palace balconies. Britain was no longer asking whether Charles was unwell. It was asking whether William had forced the monarchy into a new reign in everything but name. The leak carried details no outsider should have known. It named the ultimatum, described the collapse, and confirmed that temporary authority had begun shifting toward William. When the message reached a national broadcaster, senior officials realized they could not dismiss it as gossip. The royal household, the network of advisors and staff supporting the monarch, now faced a brutal choice: deny the truth and risk exposure, or confirm enough of it to prevent speculation from becoming panic. The prince demanded transparency. Traditional courtiers pushed for denial, warning that public knowledge of the confrontation could make constitutional stability look like family warfare. Charles ended that argument himself. Now alert, he instructed officials through a recorded private conversation not to lie in his name. The king authorized confirmation that operational changes were under discussion, because a false denial would turn a painful family crisis into a public deception. His order mattered for two reasons. The government needed certainty about who was directing royal business, and the public needed proof that the sovereign had not been silently removed. Camilla approached William before the statement was released. She told him she would authenticate the memorandum carrying Charles's earlier instructions. The queen consort still believed his deadline had been cruel, and she made no attempt to hide that pain. Yet she also accepted that her husband had privately recognized the need for his son's help. The future king thanked her, but neither pretended the wound between them had healed. Charles watched the reaction from his room as commentators called him weakened and described William as ruthless. He switched off the television, but not before one presenter asked whether a son had saved the crown by breaking his father's heart. The words stayed with the monarch because they captured the unbearable truth. Survival and suffering had become part of the same decision. Outside Buckingham Palace, newspaper vendors raised a front page dominated by the words, "The King, the Heir, the Ultimatum." An elderly man placed flowers near the gates, while a younger woman held a handwritten sign declaring, "Duty must not destroy them." The crowd was not choosing between Charles and his son, it was pleading for both. William and his father finally issued a joint signed statement confirming a phased transfer of operational responsibilities, while making clear that the king remained sovereign. The announcement changed the story from forced removal to shared duty. Yet words alone could not prove reconciliation. Charles decided to appear beside Camilla and William, knowing one public moment would determine whether the arrangement looked like healing or surrender. When the palace doors opened for their appearance, the constitutional language had already been written, but the emotional verdict would be delivered through one gesture between Charles and William that no statement could manufacture. In the end, there was no abdication, no victorious heir, and no defeated king. There was something rarer inside royal history, a sovereign admitting that endurance had limits, and a son admitting that protection without compassion could become cruelty. Charles's collapse exposed far more than physical strain. It revealed a family trapped by silence and an institution that had mistaken secrecy for strength. Their final decision did not erase the wound, but it gave the wound meaning. Charles formally retained the crown, his constitutional audiences, state ceremonies, and the final authority carried by the sovereign. Constitutional audiences are private meetings in which the monarch receives government leaders and fulfills duties as head of state. William accepted daily responsibility for long-term planning, household reform, overseas strategy, and coordination between royal offices. The transfer did not create a hidden replacement king. It created a shared structure strong enough to protect the present reign while preparing the next one. Clear boundaries followed. Father and son would meet privately every week. Major decisions would require written consultation, and medical safeguards would prevent the king's workload from again reaching a dangerous level. Neither household could approve changes affecting the other without notice. For Charles, those rules meant surrendering the isolation he had mistaken for control. For the prince, they meant accepting that reform could not be built through threats alone. Camilla approached William before the public appearance and spoke without warmth. She said she might never forgive the brutality of the ultimatum, but she now understood why he had delivered it. The queen consort had seen how deeply exhaustion had consumed her husband. The future king accepted her anger and promised that protecting Charles would become part of every decision he made. She did not offer forgiveness, but she no longer stood against him. Charles later signed the revised transfer document while his son watched in silence. He placed the pen down deliberately, reversing the helpless moment when another pen had fallen before his collapse. The king told William that sharing the burden did not make him less of a monarch, it made him strong enough to remain one. The final proof came before the public. Charles walked beside Camilla and William, carrying both the strain of the crisis and the dignity of survival. When he paused, his son instinctively offered an arm. The monarch accepted it, then held the prince's hand for one extra moment. That gesture transformed an official appearance into unmistakable reconciliation. William later placed the original 48-hour ultimatum into the fireplace. The revised agreement remained, but the threat that created it was destroyed. Consent had replaced coercion. The collapse did not end Charles's reign. It ended his rule through isolation. William had risked their bond to protect the crown, while his father proved strong enough to share control without losing himself. And so the moment that appeared destined to divide father, son, and crown became the moment that finally reunited them, not because either man won, but but because Charles chose to trust his heir, William chose to remain his son, and the monarchy chose honesty over silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.